The sound of the helicopter faded into the thick green horizon, swallowed by the forest's heavy silence. Within moments, all that remained was the hum of insects and the distant cry of a bird. Evelyn Gray stood beside her duffel bag, her heart thudding as she watched the last traces of civilization vanish. The air smelled of wet leaves and earth. For the first time in months, there were no ringing phones, no office calls, no husband waiting at the door. Just the jungle, untamed, endless, and quiet. She turned to the man beside her, Kwame Adeyemi, the local field guide she'd hired for this expedition. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and steady in a way that made the jungle seem almost less threatening. His eyes, deep and unreadable, scanned their surroundings. He didn't speak much, but his silence wasn't uncomfortable, it felt grounded, as though he belonged to the rhythm of this wild place. Evelyn, on the other hand, felt like an intruder. 3 days, she murmured, adjusting her backpack straps. Kwame nodded. 3 days, he repeated, his voice calm. That's all it will take to see what you came for. He didn't ask what she was truly searching for. Maybe he already knew it wasn't just about the lions she claimed to study. Evelyn told herself this trip was purely professional, a test run for an upcoming wildlife project. But deep down, she knew the truth, she was testing herself. Her marriage. Her restraint. Her need to feel something again. By sunset, they had set up a small camp. The air grew cooler, shadows lengthening across the ground as the forest began to sing its nighttime song. Evelyn busied herself unpacking equipment, trying to ignore the thoughts crowding her head. Her husband, Marcus, had begged her not to take this trip. Or maybe he hadn't begged, maybe he'd just stopped caring enough to try. Their last conversation had been sharp and hollow. He'd accused her of hiding behind her work, of avoiding him. She'd replied that at least her work still needed her. Now, as the flames of their campfire flickered, she replayed that moment in her mind. Maybe he was right. Maybe she did run away too easily. Kwame sat opposite her, quietly feeding dry leaves into the fire. You travel light, he said, his voice breaking the stillness. Evelyn gave a faint smile. Enough to move fast if I have to. That says something about you. She tilted her head. What does it say? That you don't like being tied down, he said simply. She looked into the fire, avoiding his gaze. The honesty in his tone disarmed her. He hadn't said it as an accusation, just as an observation. Still, the words stung. He didn't know her, and yet somehow, he'd seen through her within a few hours. They ate dinner in quiet, simple rations and boiled water, but conversation soon slipped between them like a current. Kwame spoke of his home near Lake Naivasha, of long days tracking elephants and learning the forest's patterns. His voice was calm, unhurried. Each story seemed to carry a small truth about patience, balance, and loss. Evelyn found herself drawn to his steadiness, to the way he seemed at peace with solitude. It reminded her of what she used to feel when she first fell in love with exploration, before life became a checklist of deadlines and disappointments. When she asked why he had chosen this work, Kwame looked across the fire and said, to remember that people can still trust. The wild reminds you of that, if you listen. Evelyn didn't respond right away. The word trust echoed in her mind like a quiet accusation. She had lost trust in many things, Marcus, the promises they made, and perhaps most painfully, in herself. Her chest tightened. She turned her attention to the crackling fire, letting the warmth hide the emotion rising inside her. Night fell heavier, the jungle alive with sound. They sat in companionable silence, broken only by the occasional howl or rustle from the trees. At one point, Evelyn looked up and caught Kwame watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but as though he were trying to understand her without asking questions. She quickly looked away. Her heart beat faster than it should have. She reminded herself that she was married. That this was work. That she wasn't here to feel anything. But the mind is not so easily convinced. The air between them felt charged, fragile. She tried to fill it with words. We'll start early, she said, her tone suddenly brisk. "We need to follow the lion trails before sunrise." Kwame nodded. "Understood." He stood and stretched, his silhouette framed by the firelight. Evelyn watched for a moment, then caught herself and turned toward her tent, angry at her own thoughts. When she finally lay down, she could still hear the steady rhythm of his breathing outside, near the fire. It was oddly comforting. Familiar. Just before she drifted off, a distant roar echoed through the trees, a lion's call, low and resonant. Instinctively, she sat up, her pulse racing. Kwame appeared at the tent entrance almost instantly. "It's fine," he said calmly. "They're far away." She exhaled shakily, half embarrassed. "I know. It's all right," he interrupted, smiling faintly. "You're safe." For a brief second, their eyes met in the soft light of his lantern. The sound of rain began to whisper over the canvas above them. And in that small, suspended moment, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar, something she hadn't felt in years with Marcus: safety, but also an ache she couldn't name. She lay back, staring into the darkness, trying to convince herself that it meant nothing. That the closeness, the warmth of his voice, the look in his eyes, none of it mattered. But deep down, she knew it already did. "The jungle has a way of testing you," she whispered to herself, eyes closing. "I just don't know what it's testing yet." Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming softly on the earth. Kwame sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, of the storm that was beginning to form quietly between them. That night, the forest around them slept. But neither of them truly did.
The living room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp near the couch. Ryan hung his raincoat by the door, his movements careful, almost hesitant. The air between them felt charged in a way neither could quite define. Ethan, still drying his hair with a towel, glanced toward the window. The rain had intensified, streaking down the glass in relentless sheets. "It didn't look like it would stop any time soon." "You weren't kidding," Ryan said, running a hand through his hair. "That storm's not letting up." Ethan smiled faintly. "Seems like you're stuck here for a while." "Guess so," Ryan replied, a playful tone creeping into his voice. Then, after a moment, his expression softened. "You sure you're all right though? I really thought I heard something fall. Didn't mean to burst in on you like that." Ethan shook his head, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "It's okay. I'm just glad someone cares enough to check." Ryan looked at him quietly for a moment before replying. "I think everyone deserves to have someone check on them." The words hung in the air, gentle yet heavy. Ethan felt them settle somewhere deep inside. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the rain filled the silence between them, steady, soothing, and strangely intimate. To break the tension, Ethan motioned toward the small kitchen area. "Coffee?" Ryan nodded, his shoulders easing. "Only if it's strong." Ethan chuckled softly and busied himself with the old coffee pot, grateful for something to do with his hands. Ryan leaned against the counter, watching him with quiet curiosity. "You've lived here for what, 3 years now?" Ryan asked. "Almost 4, Ethan said, pouring water into the machine. "You?" 6 months, Ryan replied. "Feels longer, though. You kind of lose track when every day starts looking the same." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding all too well. "Yeah. I know that feeling." They shared a look, brief but filled with recognition. Two men, both carrying something unseen. As they sat on the couch with steaming mugs, the conversation shifted easily, the earlier awkwardness melting away. Ryan told him about his work at a design firm, how he'd moved to the city for a fresh start. Ethan listened, his interest genuine. At one point, Ryan's tone faltered. "I was engaged once," he said quietly. "Didn't end well. She said I was too distant, too unsure of what I wanted." Ethan looked at him, unsure how to respond. There was pain behind Ryan's words, not the kind that demanded pity, but the kind that revealed depth. I'm sorry, Ethan said softly. Ryan shook his head. It's fine. I think sometimes we meet the right people at the wrong time. Ethan sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him. He thought of Mark, his boyfriend, who lived across town. Lately, their relationship had become mechanical, brief calls, polite texts, conversations that felt more like obligations than connections. They were together, yet miles apart emotionally. He told himself it was just a rough phase. But sitting here beside Ryan, listening to his voice, Ethan couldn't ignore how present he suddenly felt, how alive. Ryan leaned back, eyes half closed. You ever get the feeling that you're living on autopilot? He asked. All the time, Ethan admitted. Their laughter followed, soft and unforced. For a moment, it felt like the room itself exhaled. As the hours passed, they spoke of small things, their favorite films, music that calmed them, the kind of days they both missed. Yet beneath every exchange ran a quiet current of awareness. Every pause, every shared glance, seemed to deepen it. Eventually, the clock on the wall ticked past midnight. The rain had softened into a drizzle. Ryan glanced toward the window, reluctant to leave but sensing the night had reached its natural end. I should probably get going, he said, setting down his cup. Ethan nodded, though part of him wished he'd stay. Thanks for the company, he said. Ryan smiled, standing up. Thank you for the coffee, and for not being mad I barged in like that. As he reached the door, he hesitated, then turned back. His voice was low but steady. Ethan, sometimes the right people walk into our lives when we least expect them. Don't push them away just because it feels complicated. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to respond, but no words came. Ryan gave a small nod and stepped out into the night. The door clicked softly behind him, leaving Ethan alone with the fading echo of his voice. For a long time, Ethan just stood there, staring at the door. The apartment felt quieter than usual, almost listening with him. Outside, the storm had ended. But inside him, something new had just begun, quiet, uncertain, but undeniably alive. The week that followed carried an unusual weight for Daniel. Routine moments, making coffee in the morning, exchanging small talk with Michael, even walking through the familiar streets to work, were accompanied by a restless hum in the back of his mind. Ethan's face appeared in flashes, his confident smile replaying itself like a loop Daniel could not silence. He told himself he was being foolish, that one glance on a football ground should not hold this much power. And yet, the memory pressed itself against him, demanding attention. By Thursday, the decision was made almost without thought. Michael mentioned he would be working late, and Daniel seized the excuse. He texted Ethan, a simple message, nothing elaborate. Are you around at the ground today? The reply came quickly, as though Ethan had been waiting. Yes. Come by. When Daniel arrived, the field was nearly empty. Ethan was already there, kicking a ball lazily between his feet. The air was cooler in the evening, the sun hanging low, streaking the grass with long shadows. Daniel felt an odd nervousness, like stepping into a place where the rules were different. They played casually, passing the ball back and forth, laughter breaking the silence each time one of them missed. The physical exertion eased Daniel's tension, but it was the quiet moments, the brief pauses, the accidental brush of shoulders, that unsettled him. After half an hour, they sat on the grass to catch their breath. You came, Ethan said simply, his eyes fixed on Daniel. Daniel offered a half smile. I had the time. Ethan leaned back on his hands, his tone lighter than his expression. I didn't think you would. You don't seem like someone who takes risks. The words landed with a strange force. Daniel wanted to argue, to insist that he was more complex than Ethan assumed. But the truth was obvious, he had already taken the risk by coming here. Silence lingered between them, stretched but not uncomfortable. Then Ethan spoke again, softer this time. I like you. Daniel's breath caught. The directness was disarming, so different from the careful, measured way Michael often expressed love. Daniel's instinct was to retreat, to deny it, but he found himself whispering, You don't even know me. I don't need to, Ethan replied, his voice steady. I can see it in your eyes. The moment hung there, precarious. Daniel felt the familiar pang of guilt tugging at him, Michael's face flashing in his mind, his steady loyalty. But then Ethan's hand brushed against his, deliberate this time, and Daniel didn't move away. The contact was electric, small, but enough to signal a crossing. From that evening, the pattern began. What started as a single meeting turned into 2, then 3. Daniel found excuses easily: late shifts at work, gym sessions, errands that stretched longer than necessary. Each lie felt heavy, but each encounter with Ethan brought a rush too intoxicating to resist. They never spoke openly of what they were doing, but the secrecy itself added fuel to the fire. Texts filled the spaces of Daniel's days, short, playful messages that carried more meaning than they should. "When are you free again? Thinking of you." Daniel kept his phone close, deleting messages as quickly as they appeared, terrified Michael might stumble upon them. At home, Michael began to notice the change. Daniel was distracted, his laughter less frequent, his eyes often elsewhere. One evening, as they cooked dinner together, Michael asked gently, "Is everything all right? You've been distant." Daniel forced a smile, stirring the pasta sauce with deliberate focus. "Just work stress. It'll pass." Michael accepted the answer, though not without a faint shadow of doubt. Daniel felt the sting of his lie, but it was easier than confessing the truth. Meanwhile, Ethan grew bolder. He would linger closer, his words edged with suggestion, his presence pressing against Daniel's restraint. Daniel told himself it was just an escape, a harmless thrill, but the reality was undeniable. His loyalty was unraveling. The first undeniable betrayal came one night after another game. The two sat again at the edge of the field, their conversation drifting, their laughter easy. Ethan leaned in, not rushing, just closing the space between them until there was no denying the intent. Daniel hesitated, just a heartbeat of resistance, before letting it happen. The kiss was brief but searing, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. That night, Daniel lay beside Michael in their apartment, the guilt heavy in his chest. Michael's breathing was calm, steady, trusting. Daniel turned toward the ceiling, his mind replaying Ethan's lips against his, torn between shame and the undeniable desire for more. By the time sleep finally claimed him, Daniel knew he had stepped fully into a double life. He was no longer just a man tempted. He was a man deceiving.